You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Happening. Tonight, there will be the dinner at Frankston at La Porchetta starting at 6:30pm. For all listeners on that side of town, I know people complain everything happens in the CBD, but not for the anarchist world this week. We go anywhere we're invited to. So tonight, 6:30pm to about 9pm, La Porchetta's in Frankston, the last Wednesday of the month. Now, believe it or not, from 12:30 to 6am on May Day, which is tomorrow, we'll be doing a talk back show. There'll be Patricia, Mandy the Librarian, and hopefully the Goddess of Dawn. So ring us, or otherwise we'll fall asleep. And don't forget about the Anarchist Walk. I'll talk about that in a minute. The sacred cows have wandered in, they've wandered out. They don't like what they've seen. Here we go. We're about to blast. This program has been streaming live on 3cr.org.au. The program is podcast. You can access the podcast by going to 3cr.org.au. My name is JokingDutton, and if you're wondering what anarchy is all about, well, this isn't a definition from an avowed, you like that, anarchist. That's what I've been called. Well, who knows? Look, anarchos means without rulers, not without rules. It's a mechanism via which people live by not having dictators or self-appointed or elected rulers that tell them what to do. It's based on two principles, because what gives rulers the ability to determine the fate of billions of people? It's inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggles, the struggle to devolve power, share power, possibly through direct democratic means, and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. So they're simple concepts which all civilizations from time immemorial have struggled to achieve. Some haven't, most haven't, and especially in a 21st century world which is dominated by private investment for private profit mentality, the struggle is a long-term one. And if you think it's going to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen tomorrow. Now, I'd like to start off the program by talking about a few local issues. Not issues, but the things that we're organising over the next few days, which are important. One, tonight, that's Wednesday, the 30th of April, we're having the dinner at La Porchetta's in Frankston for listeners from that part of the city and that part of the region. So tonight, La Porchetta, 6:30pm, it's on. Now, we're having a special May Day program here at 3CR, where I'm broadcasting from in Melbourne. But any listener anywhere around Australia who can't go to sleep, has trouble sleeping in the morning, we're doing a talkback program, a May Day talkback program. The Talkback with Attitude team, which broadcasts here at Thursday at 10am, will be doing a 6 hour marathon. It's a talkback. Anybody can ring us. Just ring 03 419 0155. And if you're listening to, you can send us SMSs. So Patricia, myself, Mandy the Librarian, and the Goddess of Dawn will be here to take your call. So keep us awake and keep calling. It doesn't have to be about May Day. It's about what interests you at this particular point in time. Now, May Day, the 1st of May, we're having. I'm doing my normal historical walk through Melbourne on the 1st of May, to highlight the anarchist connections with the origins of May Day and looking at important historical sites as far as May Day is concerned and the anarchist connection. So come along It starts at Chummy Place. It's CHUMMIE in Carlton. Ends up at Her Majesty's Theatre. No, we haven't got 3 tickets, but you'd be interested to know. If you want to know what anarchism has got to do with the Her Majesty's Theatre, come along, and then we have a late lunch down at the Paramount, catering service. So that's something you can do on the 1st of May if you are in Melbourne. But if you're not in Melbourne, you can always ring us on the special May Day talk back show from 12:30am to 6am. That's Eastern Standard Time. So 039 419 0155. Now let's move on. Get Australia back on track. Yeah, sounds good, doesn't it? Get Australia back on track. It's as if the coalition thinks that the Australia has been derailed by concepts which challenge powerful entities in our societies. Get Australia back on track. What do they mean by this? Does it mean we go back to the good old days when we could, marginalise minorities in the most evil of ways? Back to the good old days of the White Australia policy? Back to the good old days of genocide of First Nations people? Back to the good old days of keeping women in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant? Back to the good old days of God, King and country, where we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for the glory of God, King and country? So get Australia back on track. Now, you may or may not know, but I'm standing as a candidate in the electorate of Flinders in Victoria, which is a blue ribbon Liberal seat on an economically radical and socially progressive platform. Not an anarchist platform, but economically radical and socially progressive platform. And I'd like to thank all those people who've assisted me with what's going on down there. But it's interesting because, you see, most people have no idea of why they find themselves in that particular situation. And we have no idea as a whole, because we tend to leave government to the political class. Now, Mr. Dutton, the Right Honourable Mr. Dutton, the leader of the Liberal Party and the leader of the Liberal National Coalition, has been getting a little bit out of kilter lately. He's not happy. Now, the Liberal Party has done something which is fascinating, which you may not have noticed. They are preferencing one nation above all other parties. In the electorate where I'm standing, one nation is their first preference. Well, second preference after voting for the Liberal Party. And around all the marginal electorates, there's an agreement now between one nation and the Liberal Party. Now, this agreement means that if Mr. Dutton is elected, what it means is, if the Liberal National Party is elected, is they'll be beholden to a significant degree to one nation, because one nation preferences is what Mr. Dutton is all about. Because he's understood the campaign which they've been running, which is very, very, very light on policies. Trust me campaign, and we'll put get Australia back on track. And the fact is, this is not enough to push him over the line. So what we've seen in the last 3 days is a tactical move by the Liberal Party to reinvigorate the so-called culture wars. And nothing highlights this more than the kerfuffle around the Welcome to Country ceremonies. So Mr Dutton has realised that the only chance the Liberal National Party of getting into power is to invigorate One Nation supporters to preference them above any other political party, because they've given their second preference to One Nation. Remember, even John Howard didn't do that. So what you'll hear in the next few days is this call, not based on economic policies, not based on anything real, but based on division and hatred, hoping against hope that this change in direction in a basically policy 3 zone, as far as they're concerned, will get them the preferences to push them over the line. I mean, this is a strategy. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, who you vote for is your business, obviously. I'm not here to tell you who to vote for. I'm not even telling you to vote for me. If you're in the electorate of Flinders, that's your bloody business. But what I am encouraging you to do is to look at the policy agenda of the candidates. And you'll find that with the tightening of the nomination laws and the tightening of the way political parties can be registered by increasing membership from 500 to 1,500, you'll notice that many of the smaller political parties have now been removed from the electoral fray. And as far as the House of Representatives is concerned, when you go to vote, if you vote, and you look at your little green piece of paper for the House of Representatives, you'll notice that the great majority of the candidates are party candidates, because party candidates have an advantage over independents. While independents have to scrabble around to get 100 people to nominate them and find a $2,000 deposit, well, party candidates, you just send in your secretary with a whole list of people for each electorate, pay your cash, and hey, bingo, you've got people in, 151 electorates standing. So it's no accident that this election, in many regards, has been an election about looking backwards, not about looking forwards. And as we've seen, the 1/3 of Australians who rely on social security benefits to survive have basically been written out. That's right, written out of this election campaign. And the dilemma is, by increasing hatred and division in the community and increasing fear, whether it's fear of migration, fear of crime, fear of this, fear of that, fear of the sun falling on Earth, whatever, today's fearful little story. The fact is that you can manipulate people to vote on the basis of a campaign which is devoid of policy and all about creating fear and division in the community. So Mr Dutton can't help himself, because he knows, and his party knows, but because of their policies, which they've reneged on, which they will obviously reintroduce if they're elected, is not going to get him across the line. And he needs the help of these One Nation and Trumpet, whatever they call, supporters, to give their second preference to the Liberal Party for them to survive. Think about it. You listen to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. Hate media. Sometimes I think I'm living, well, maybe I am living in a parallel universe. Mr. Dutton, the Right Honourable Mr. Dutton, the very Right Honourable Mr. Dutton, let out his true feelings. He described as the Australian Broadcasting Corporation and The Guardian as the hate media. Now, you know that on this program we speak about the government gelded ABC and the fact that it wouldn't say boo to a dead mouse. So I thought, is this a joke? And then he said, it is a joke. And I thought, oh yeah. I mean, the hate media. Which section of the legacy media and social media promotes hatred and division? Which section is devoid of facts, let alone ideas? Which section of the media has allowed the rise and rise of the buffoon who currently calls himself the President of the United States, courtesy of the people of that country? I mean, you've got to be joking. If Mr. Dutton thinks the ABC and The Guardian are the hate media in this country, you begin to understand the mentality behind the current Liberal Party campaign and what they will do in terms of legislation, not just to assist their mates, the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, but what they will do to ensure that hatred and division continues to be the primary aspect of our society. Now, as I said, I'm running as an independent in the electorate of Flinders, a blue ribbon Flinders seat, blue ribbon Liberal seat. Now, why would I bother? I've put my own money. I've put over $9,000 of my own money in the campaign. I mean, that's a splash. That's nothing. You need about $1 million to run a good independent campaign in an electorate. Just one House of Representatives electorate. You need at least $1 million. But why bother? Why have I bothered to put my money where my mouth is? Why have I bothered to waste time? Well, in many regards, I have bothered because people ask me. I don't go into electorate, and put myself forward unless people ask me. And they asked me to stand as a candidate because they were sick and tired of the anemic policies pursued by the major political parties and many of the minor parties, which are based on, creating division and hatred in our community. I was sick and tired of it. They wanted some real change. Now, the big problem is, and you hear it every day, whether in personal conversation, on the social media, or on radio, television, pay TV, you name it, you hear about the problems people have accessing basic services. We even have the tragedy of private charities raising money to send Australian kids to get a good public education, not a private education, but a decent public education. Brings tears to your eyes, and it did the first time I saw that particular commercial. I mean, I'm very happy that people are trying. But you see, every time we try as a nation to solve an issue, the question arises, where is the money coming from? And I know where the money is coming from, and you know where the money is coming from. It's basically almost 70% is coming from pay-as-you-earn taxpayers. It's not coming from the corporate sector. 1/3 of the major corporations last year paid no taxation, and most of the major corporations see paying taxation as almost a voluntary exercise. So, in many regards, what we are doing as a society, as we beg and beseech for the crumbs which are brushed off the corporate table in our direction, what we are doing as a society is basically squeezing pimples to treat acne. Yeah? You like the analogy? Squeezing a pimple to treat acne. You can't treat acne by squeezing individual pimples. You may get a scar, you may not, and you may get some temporary relief from the discomfort of the pimple if you squeeze it, but you're not going to solve the problem of acne by squeezing individual pimples. And it's the same in Australian society. If there are issues in terms of access to education, access to healthcare, access to infrastructure, access to housing, access to, services, access to energy, I could go on and on. You don't resolve the problem by having 32,000 registered charities trying to access the problem. And you're not going to resolve the problem by setting up little committees here and there. Obviously, I've got nothing against little committees being set up here and there, and I've been members of little committees all my life, squeezing pimples. But I do recognise that we need to treat the acne as a whole. And the acne I talk about is the fact that we are totally reliant on a private investment for private profit mantra. Even if you're involved in reformist activities, the fact is that most of these activities are totally dependent on government income or private charity to go ahead. Think about it. So what am I proposing when I talk about economically radical? Well, I know, not think or believe, I know that 27 million people, a drop in the ocean of the 8 billion souls on this planet currently, minus a few as I speak. I know that we shouldn't have any of these issues. They are all solvable. And they're solvable in three ways. One is we need to change the revenue stream. And what am I talking about that? We shouldn't have to depend almost totally on taxes raised from wage earners. We should be looking at things like a 1% financial transaction tax, maybe a 1% stock market tax. We should be looking at nationalising the mineral resources in this country. Extraordinary riches. And apart from a few peppercorn royalties and the creation of some billionaires and ensuring that corporations get a wonderful profit, we've given away this stuff to people who don't give a shit about what happens to us. They're quite happy to see us squabbling. That's right. And the key word is squabbling over the crumbs that are brushed out in our direction as they brushed off the corporate table. Think about it. Then the other thing is, if you live in a capitalist society, They keep telling us that capitalism is about competition. There is no competition in Australia. I mean, there are many, they say 5 million people work in small business. I'm confident 5 million people work in small business, but most of the small business people I know, including myself, as a medical practitioner, don't make profits, huge profits. Huge profits are made by corporations who are big enough not to worry about competition. Because what we've done in the society is remove competition by privatising public assets. And I'll talk about that in a minute.
You're listening to a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned to hear the rest of your 3CR podcast.
You're listening to The Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. My name is JokingDutton. I'm hosting today's program. If you want to access the material, the program is podcast. You can go to 3cr.org.au. You can go to YouTube channels, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest, JosephToscano.now. Facebook page, Joseph Toscano, Toscano for Flinders, Public Interest Before Corporate Interest web page, Facebook page, public housing, everybody's business, defend and extend public housing. The list goes on and on. The stuff's there. It's up to you whether you access it or not, because ultimately you can remain somebody should do something about that tribe or the Gunner tribe, but unless you tear up your membership card of those tribes, nothing will happen. You see what happened? We'll go to an election on Saturday. You'll cast your ballot, or you may not cast a ballot because you're unhappy with the candidates there. A government will be elected, and they'll continue to do the bidding of the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, because you hardly ever see legislation passed by both houses of Parliament which somehow restricts their ability to create so much damage in society. So let's get back to this competition concept, all right? Let's get back to this competition concept. Now, in a capitalist society, if you want competition, you need a strong public sector, and in this country, every significant publicly owned asset has been given away in fire sales to the private sector. For example, Commonwealth Serum Laboratory, you want to buy a share today? Around $300 a share. When it was privatised by Mr Keating about 40 years ago, I think they got about $2.60 a share. Shows you what happens. Gold today, about 5,000 Australian dollars an ounce. When the Liberal Party decided to sell our gold reserves, sell them off, the country got about $280 an ounce compared to $5,000 an ounce. Wonderful. Wonderful thing. So what I'm saying is, if there's no competition, you get the creation of monopolies. And we see this in Australian business. You have a small business sector where a significant proportion of businesses go bankrupt, where 90% of businesses which are created, shut down within 5 years. You've got a landlord class that owns places that people rent, who squeeze the life out of small business. You pay your rent, you pay the insurance, you pay the rates, you pay the fire safety levy, you pay the water charges, and it goes on top of your rent. And you expect a small business to survive? And you'll find that people think, I'm going to get out of the rat race. I'm going to open up a small business. I'm going to open up this wonderful cafe, and everybody's going to flock to my doors, and everything will be wonderful. But the fact is, at the end of the day, you're lucky to get a wage because of the unfair competition. So what do? Well, you increase the public sector. And a simple way to do that is to increase the supply of public housing. Every day we hear stories of people paying 40, 50, 60% of their income to keep a roof over their head, whether it's a mortgage repayment or a rent. And we hear the stories of people who, like single parents, people who are unemployed, who are finding it exceptionally difficult to rent or find accommodation in the private housing market. But if you increase public housing numbers, you increase competition in the real estate market. Today, the real estate market is dominated 99.9% by the private sector, whether it's privately owned real estate or real estate which we claim is publicly owned but privately owned social affordable housing, whatever they like to call it these days. The fact is that the public housing stocks have plummeted. See, public housing is not just about having a roof over your head. It's about the security of knowing you can live in that environment and pay 25% of your income as rent. If your income is unemployment benefits, you pay 25% of your unemployment benefits. If your income is the average wage, you pay 25% of your average wage. Nothing could be fairer. And well, unfortunately, this is not true. You used to know that you had security of tenure. These days, as governments privatise the public housing sector and hand over money and titles to the private housing sector in the social and affordable and community housing sector, we are seeing the stock of public housing dwindle to nothing. Now, we've had these wonderful schemes put forward over the last few weeks about how to decrease rents. We're going to cut migration. Yep. We're going to, what are we going to do? We're going to evict people. Yes. We're going to ensure that negative gearing continues. And the list goes on. And obviously none of this is going to make any difference. At the end of World War II, which was 80 years ago, the government embarked on a public housing building blitz. Because people who had sacrificed their lives and their health in World War II, when they came back, they demanded to have a roof over their heads. Today, we seem to be so totally disorganised, so totally fearful of the consequences of standing up for what few rights we have, that we're quite happy to accept the status quo. Extraordinary. Just extraordinary. Now, guess what? Those of you who are working, your money goes into a super fund. I'm sure most of the people listening to this program haven't got a self-managed super fund where they can, invest as they like, that they rely on one of the super large corporations. Guess what's been happening in the last few months? Australian super funds have been increasing their investment in the United States of America. As people's balances drop as a result of the erratic policies of the buffoon in Washington, Buffalini, the same superannuation funds are investing in the USA. Now, if you are a member of a superannuation fund, especially if you're nearing retirement, I strongly suggest to you that you need to find out where your money, it's not their money, your money, has been invested. Because I keep saying superannuation is the privatisation of old age, all right? Instead of getting a decent pension or a universal basic income, what you do is you save for your own old age, and then you use that money by these large superannuation funds to invest around the world to get a return. So you can have a nice retirement, you can buy that boat you've always wanted. Make sure you get a boating license and a life jacket. There are problems sometimes. But find out. Say, excuse me, I'm nearing retirement. I've got so much in my super fund. Say you got it 500,000. Where are you investing this money? What are you doing with it? Are you investing in ethical investments or not? Now, guess what? Yes, I know you're listening to the Anarchist World this week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. But guess what? Have you heard the word Gaza, G-A-Z-A, mentioned during the election campaign? Or the word West Bank? Have you heard about the atrocities which continue to be committed by the Israeli state, trying to force Gazans to unconditionally surrender by denying food, fuel, water, as well as bombing tanks? You've got to bomb something. If you've bombed everything, all the building structures, well, you've always got tents you can bomb, haven't you? Yeah, well, it's no laughing matter. What about Gaza? Have you noticed how the rest of the world sits on its hands? The International Criminal Court makes pronouncements, and the opposition in this country labels the Greens as Jew haters. Mr. Dutton's words, not mine. And the opposition continues to provide total support for the carnage that's happening in Gaza. Well, what about Gaza? Now, everybody talks about a permanent ceasefire. They talk about rebuilding Gaza. They talk about the creation of a Palestinian state. But there's something that very few people are raising, which I'd like to raise on this program today. The United Nations. Although we've seen the Israeli state ban the United Nations from providing aid to Gaza, I think the situation has arisen internationally that drastic action needs to be taken regarding the brutality and the carnage that's occurring in Gaza. Now, obviously, there are moves afoot to end the carnage in the Ukraine, which, although has been difficult, it hasn't reached the crescendo that we've seen in Gaza, which is a little area about half the size of the city of Sydney or Melbourne, possibly the size of Adelaide. How about United Nations troops being stationed, the blue helmets, being stationed on the border of Gaza and the West Bank to protect local people, not just from the Israeli state, but Hamas? Why shouldn't the world intervene? Because there are limits to what we can allow to happen on planet Earth in a period of instantaneous reporting. Now, it's very easy to forget about Gaza. It's very easy to forget about the fate of the 2 million people in Gaza and I think the other 3 million in the West Bank. But it is an exceptionally difficult situation. Now, I noticed that on the 7th of May, which will be about in 8 days' time, the cardinals under 80 will be electing a new pope. And the whole world except me is waiting for the white smoke to come out of the chimney on the Vatican. Now, wouldn't it be a nice thing if the new pope, instead of speaking about the need for peace and brotherhood and sisterhood, turned up on the Gaza crossing in Egypt and attempted to cross into Gaza? Because that's the situation we have now arrived at, where people of good intention, not just ordinary folk who are sacrificing their lives in Gaza, providing urgent medical care the best way they can, including a number of Australian doctors and relief workers, but actually the world leaders. Wouldn't it be nice to see the new Australian Prime Minister turn up at the border between Egypt and Gaza, or maybe President Macron, and attempt to enter and see what happens, whether the Israeli state is happy to shoot them in cold blood? Because there comes a period in life where you need to stand up, and if you don't stand up, the same atrocities will occur. And what happened in Germany and Eastern Europe and many other sections of Western Europe during World War II, which ended 80 years ago, highlights what happens when we don't stand up and support resistance. I've noticed that the resistance in Israel is beginning to increase, not just in terms of the release of hostages, which is understandable, but resistance is increasing in terms of the barbarity of the actions of the Israeli state. And when I hear the Right Honourable Mr. Dutton tell Australians that Mr. Netanyahu would be welcome in this country, although we have signed an agreement with the International Criminal Court, and although there is an arrest warrant out for him, that we'd be quite happy to ignore that arrest warrant if Mr. Dutton was Prime Minister, and then he, got him to address both Houses of Parliament. Wouldn't that be nice? We could follow our masters in the US of A. You listen to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. Now, I'm going to talk about a day which is totally ignored in most of Australia, although there is a public holiday in Queensland and the Northern Territory because of previous struggle. May Day. May Day. I want to look at the history of May Day in this country and also the history of May Day internationally, because May Day has basically been legislated out of existence in a country where striking outside an enterprise bargaining agreement period is illegal, and individual workers can be fined for up to $10,000 a day. I think it's important we understand why May Day is so important. And obviously from the studio from which I'm broadcasting in 3CR in Melbourne will be having May Day specials all day, beginning between 12:30 and 6 a.m. in the morning with a Talk Back with Attitude May Day special where people from around the country can ring us to talk about May Day or what's on their mind. All they've got to do is ring 03-9 419 0155. So the May Day, the facts. Let's look at the facts. I know facts are disposable commodities in 2025, and nobody's interested in facts. We're interested in beliefs. We're interested in thinking and beliefs, but not in facts. Now let's start off with the May Day, the unpalatable facts, or the palatable facts. The history of May Day, both internationally and in Australia, is interlinked with the history of the anarchist movement. In 1884, at a conference of the Federated Trades and Labour Unions of the United States and Canada, which was sold to the United States, I'm sure the buffoon would like to hear this, because it was a federation of trades and labour unions from the United States and Canada as one. Yeah. The conference decided to launch an intensive campaign for an 8-hour working day that will peak in widespread struggles on the 1st of May 1886. Now, I do know that tradespeople had won the 8-hour day, but 6-day week in Australia, I think since 1856, 1855 in Sydney, 1856 in Melbourne, led by the stonemasons, who were basically, at the forefront of struggle because they were important in terms of the building that was going on in Australia at that particular point in time. Now, on the 1st of May 1886, demonstrations were held across the United States and Canada, and in Chicago, over 30,000 workers went on strike, and over 80,000 took part in demonstrations to mark the struggle for the 8-hour day. That's the very beginning. 2 days later, that's right, 2 days later, striking workers met outside the McCormick Harvesting Machine Company. Now, Chicago police, as they did, fired on the workers, killing 4 and wounding many others. The Chicago anarchists, who were quite prominent in the struggle for the 8-hour day, organised a protest meeting at Haymarket Square for the next evening. The rally was non-violent, was only attended by about 300 people. As the rally was breaking up, police charged the demonstrators. Someone threw a bomb at the police, killing 1 police officer. The police panicked, firing indiscriminately into the crowd and at each other. 7 police and 4 demonstrators were killed, and over 100 police and demonstrators were wounded. This is out of a crowd of less than 300. 8 prominent anarchists were rounded up and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, although only 3, Albert Parsons, August Spies and Samuel Fiefton, spoke at the rally. All eight, Albert Parsons, August Spies, Samuel Fielding, Michael Schwab, Oscar Neebe, George Engel, Adolf Fischer and Louis Ling were found guilty. 7 were sentenced to death and 1, Oscar Neebe, to 15 years imprisonment. 5, August Spies, George Engel, Adolf Fischer and Albert Parsons were hung on the 11th of November 1887, that famous day, the 11th of November. Louis Ling cheated the hangman by committing suicide the night before, and Fielding and Schwab's sentences were commuted to life in prison. I mean, all 8 men were victims of the widespread hysteria whipped up by the Chicago media, the yellow press they used to call it, because cheap paper was yellow. It was later proven, that's right, a few years later, that all 8 men had nothing to do with the bombing, and those executed and those imprisoned received a full pardon. I'll repeat it again. It was later proven all 8 men had nothing to do with the bombing, and those executed and those imprisoned received a full pardon. In Australia, on the 1st of May 1886, David Andre, William Andre, brothers, Chummy Fleming, Monty Miller and Jack Andrews, heeded in the call of the Federated Trades and Labour Unions of the United States and Canada, launched the Melbourne Anarchist Club, Australia's first anarchist organisation. 3 years later, on the 14th of July 1889, the International Conference, the Second International, decided to make the 1st of May a great day of international demonstration. An Australian delegate, John Norton from the New South Wales Trades and Labour Council, attended the conference. The first Australian May Day celebration and demonstration was held in Barcaldine in Queensland at the height of the shearers' strike, and Ipswich. Barcaldine and Ipswich. Over 1,000 people took part. 600 shearers marched on horseback behind the Odd Fellows band. Because you've got to remember that at this particular point in time, mutual aid societies were all the go because there was no social security benefits. And the Odd Fellows were a mutual aid society, which was demutualised in the 1980s. In 1893, moves were made in Queensland to have the 8-hour day celebrated on the 1st of May instead of March. So, it's an important day. May not be important to anybody else, but it's an important day. I encourage people listening to this program today on the 30th of April 2025 to join me at midday on Thursday the 1st of May 2025 at Chummy, Chummie Place, Carlton, that's next to Argyle Street, to mark the 138th anniversary of the Melbourne Anarchist Club, Australia's first anarchist organisation. And what's it got to do with Her Majesty's Theatre? The Melbourne Anarchist Club hired a second-storey room in a theatre that stood on the site Her Majesty Theatre currently stands, as their headquarters in 1886 and 1887. So it's a walking tour. There's no cost. It'll take about an hour and a half. We'll visit about 10 separate sites, and then we'll have lunch. So you're all welcome. Unfortunately, you won't be able to make it if you're interstate, but you can always organise a May Day tour or rally or vigil in your city, your town, to mark the date. Now, one last thing. Toscano for Flinders, as you know, if you go to the Toscano for Flinders Facebook page, you can see the policies that I'm pushing, not because I'm going to be elected. I've got a Bradbury's chance, obviously, of being elected. But again, I think it's important that we use every possibility to get our ideas across to people who have got no familiarity with ideas that get outside the envelope. Now, the good news is voting will end on the 3rd of May. That's right, Saturday the 3rd of May. But the good news is that on Sunday, the 4th of May, I'm inviting all those people who are involved in this campaign and our supporters to join us for a celebratory picnic. That's right, bring food and drinks to share. Bring food and drinks to share. We don't want to eat the crumbs that are brushed off the corporate table. Bring the food and drinks to share. It'll be held at the Rosebud Picnic Area, which is across the road from the Rosebud Hotel and next door to the Rosebud Bowling Club, next to the Rosebud Village Green. You can't miss it. Come down, midday to 3. Meet the people who made the campaign possible. I'd like to thank people for their enthusiasm and for inviting me to stand in the electorate of Flinders, a blue ribbon Liberal seat. So come along to the picnic, celebratory picnic, midday, the 4th of May, which is a Sunday, and from 12 to 3 bring food and drinks to share at the Rosebud Picnic Ground across the road from the Rosebud Hotel next to the Rosebud Bowling Club. You can't miss it. Thank you once again for listening to the Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station. Have a great May Day tomorrow. And if you can get involved in activities tomorrow, get involved. If you can't, you can always ring us on the May Day Talkback show here on Community Radio 3CR. Thank you once again for listening to the Anarchist World this week on your local community radio station, courtesy of those wonderful people at the Community Radio Network.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.